Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this week's episode of Demystifying Money. I'm your host, Misty Lynch, and today I'm joined by Aaliyah Kissick. She is the owner of AK Boutique. She's also Miss Illinois United States and the founder of the Financial Literacy Diaries. Thank you so much, Aaliyah, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
This episode of Demystifying Money with Misty Lynch is proudly sponsored by Soundview Financial Advisors. Visit www.soundviewfinancialadvisors.com to learn more.
And you're also a retired Army veteran, is that correct too?
Yep, I was medically retired back in December.
Wow. So for all of you that are listening on the podcast and not watching it on YouTube, so Aaliyah, you are, you're pretty impressive for being such a young woman. And I am so excited to talk with you specifically about financial literacy because I'm part of the Gen X elder millennial generation. And so I think that there's certain things about financial literacy that are very different for people that, were born in the year 2000 or later. And I think it's kind of an interesting topic to see, what we can be doing to help young people who are still struggling to learn about money. I don't think financial literacy has come very far at all in the past few decades. I think that it's still something that a lot of people struggle with and struggle with teaching it to their kids. So I love that you focus on financial literacy and helping young people with financial literacy down to elementary school grades. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, when did you become, did you become an entrepreneur first and then fall in love with financial planning and literacy, or how has that worked out for you?
This is a fun story. So it all started when I was 11 and I got my first work permit because I wanted to work in the talent field. And I have a fun little stint as an actress and a commercial model. And that's kind of how I got into pageantry. So that's like planting a seed. But basically, I started when I was 11. And as I got a little bit older, I realized that the money that I was making from modeling other people's clothing or modeling for their business, I realized that I could have a larger percentage of the profit from that if I started my own business. So that was the thought process behind me starting my boutique, AK Boutique, at the age of 17. So I started it between my junior and senior year of high school. And it was essentially a perpetual garage sale that I used, and my marketing strategy was a cardboard sign. So it was a very small operation. I literally started with $50, but I had the vision in mind, right? So I'm a huge fan of sustainability, and I've always been a huge fan of sustainability. So economic sustainability and ecological sustainability is what I was focusing on specifically. I wanted to create a business that was as lean as possible and as ecologically friendly as possible. And I had all summer to think about this because I had nothing to do over summer break. So I created a resale store that was focusing on bringing the boutique experience into thrifting and offering the opportunity for women to get resale items that maybe don't necessarily want to dig into the thrift store or don't want to pay consignment store prices. So I was looking for a nice middle of the road with that. And I started off with a very small amount of money, but because I was focused on building the business and had all the time in the world to learn about doing it, I used a lot of internet resources. I started to actually make a little bit of money after about 6 months. Had no idea what to do with it. No one in my family had ran a business before. And running a business and those finances is a little bit different than just running a household without a business. So I went online where I learned how to start my business and came across a lot of this excellent financial literacy content. It changed my life. I was able to go through college debt free. I set myself up for success in my personal life and now in my marriage. And that is where I got my passion for financial literacy.
I think that's one of the great things today is that access to information, because I do think while there is a lot of confusing information out there, bad information, I do feel like for people who are driven and want to find a way to do that, if you start asking the right questions or searching for the right topics or things to do, that there is a way to navigate the finances, even entrepreneurship, which I feel like a lot of businesses don't last within the first year, but I think it's a lot of times because they're not managing the business finances properly, or they're not thinking about things like taxes or other things that they might not even be aware of. They just know how to do something well or something that they're really interested in. So I think it's great that you kind of sought out those resources, because none of us really are born knowing what we should be doing here. None of this comes naturally or organically. And like you said, you didn't have somebody you could turn to in your family to say, how do I do this? Right. So I think that, teaching yourself financial literacy, it's something that I did as well. I think it's something that should be more accessible. I think that this is something that should be taught. So I appreciate, can you tell me a little bit more about the financial literacy diaries and what that is?
Yeah, so the financial literacy diaries is basically this solution. Hold on, I'm going to move. Sorry about that. I just noticed that my camera got messed up a little bit. Okay, great. The financial literacy diaries is a organization and education initiative that I started because I noticed that as I took the role as Miss Illinois United States 2023 and started advocating for financial literacy full time for that entire year, I realized that there weren't a lot of resources out there for students,
Mhm.
but additionally, there weren't a lot of resources out there specifically for young adults like me who are trying to figure out their place in the world. I
Mhm.
realized as I was talking not only to the students, but also their teachers, that taking that narrative based approach was a really great way to get people to start thinking about money. Fundamentally, in this, attention economy right now, the people who are getting the most attention are the people who are the most attention grabbing. And whenever we're talking about financial content on the internet, this is probably something that you've experienced a lot as you've worked with clients and worked with people in your own education initiative, is that there's a lot of misinformation on the internet and it's growing significantly just because it's a lot easier to yell into a microphone with a get rich quick scheme than it is to actually sit down and talk about financial literacy itself.
Mhm.
The way that I see it is the content of financial literacy can actually be pretty boring, especially when you compare it to a lot of the really fun stuff that's online right now, like all this entertaining stuff. And so using narrative and story is a great way to stay true to the roots of a true financial education while also having that entertainment element. Because who doesn't love hearing a story about the time that you didn't realize that you had to pay your credit card bills back and figuring out the way that you're going to overcome that story arc behind it, because sometimes our biggest mistakes can be the lessons that another person needs to hear, and sometimes the wins are something that feel good so you know it's possible, and that is the basis of the financial literacy diaries. I'm in the process right now of building that program out. I've been speaking to a lot of excellent people and I have those episodes that are backlogged for release at some point in early fall.
That's amazing. Yeah. Storytelling is something, I think that's how a lot of us have learned a lot of different things. And you mentioned another thing about financial literacy being fairly boring. And I agree. I think it's like other topics like nutrition and other things. There's a lot of things that are like way more like fast, catchy, fun, like so like captivating, but like really like if you know the basics, which is very similar to like money and building wealth, like it takes time. There's certain things that you need to know and do. And I do think that it is easier to kind of get through, get the point across and the importance using stories. And I've worked with the Singleton Foundation, Million Stories Media, doing like some content, trying to get those stories out there, people sharing their own experiences, because I feel like that's how we learn. And that's where the shame and guilt that have been going throughout, decades when it comes to money has really held us back, because a lot of times we're not sharing those stories about when we had to dig ourselves out of debt or when we made a financial mistake or when something failed, because we only want to show people the highlight reel, the win.
Yeah.
And even the wins, I find a lot of people are afraid to share because it sounds like you're bragging. Or maybe it feels like, oh, no one's going to want to hear this because, and I've talked to some people where I'm the only person they tell how much money they made last year. And they're really proud of it, but they feel like I can't say this to them because they'll be like, oh, good for you. So it's just such a sensitive area. So I love anything that kind of increases the conversation and the dialogue around money, because it shouldn't be that way. It should be, I think it's something that we should be talking about a lot more and a lot earlier. Um, because we were talking before about how, I was born in 1980. You had to go get money, like physical paper money, cash. Like, and if you didn't have cash, it was pretty easy to see, like, okay, you don't have enough. And now you have like credit cards, debit cards, taps. You mentioned like cash apps and things like that. That I feel like for kids, it's very abstract to really understand when like somebody says no, or we don't have the money for that right now. Like, because you're not really seeing money anymore. So how have things changed as far as like finances and money when you're talking to young people? Is it harder for them to grasp, or is it something that they are curious about?
I think that from my own experiences, kids are very curious about it, right? It's like this foreign system that they haven't quite been initiated into yet, but they still see it happening in front of their eyes. I really think that we do not give children enough credit most of the time when it comes to education, because if you really sit down and start talking to them, they really start to get some diverse and some very complicated topics. I remember in one of the classes, I was working with a second grade class. We actually had a really good conversation about the concept of tangible and intangible, because it was touching exactly what you're talking about. You can't really touch money anymore.
Mhm.
It used to be very tangible. It used to be something that you felt in your hand. If you had $1, you literally had a dollar sitting on the table. If you had $100, it was stacked up. This doesn't even get into the concept of inflation, where $100 in 1980 is a lot different than $100
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
2024. But just talking about the tangible and intangible concept of money, kids were asking me about it. They didn't have the language and they didn't have the vocabulary, so I was able to give it to them. Another concept with money I really want to talk about is by talking about it younger, which is why I start with elementary students. It decreases that guilt, right? If you have someone coming into your class, and whenever I was Miss Illinois United States, I got to be the princess, right? Like I specifically remember I went back to the school that I went to, and in the Facebook group that's associated with my hometown, these kids were talking about how the princess came and was talking about money, and all the parents thought they were just going insane. I'm like, oh no, that was me. We had a
That was
financial
me.
literacy class. Yeah, yeah. So I literally got to see in real time, because I happened to go back to my home community, that the students were going home and telling their parents about the conversation, so they were remembering it.
Mhm.
Even if some of the things that I said went over some of the students' head, because when we're talking about education, you can't teach based off of averages, especially when it comes to storytelling, right? Some students may not understand every concept, but it's the idea of the concept being open for them to learn. It's about planting a seed. That's my main goal. If they understand everything I'm talking about, that's great. They're going above and beyond. But if they internalize the fact that it's okay to talk about money and it's not something that you should feel guilty or shameful about. Some people have more money, some people have less money. That is what's really important for me to get students to think about, so that by the time they are my age or a little bit younger and starting to think about their financial decisions, I think that decision making really starts kicking in between the ages of 16 and 17.
Yeah.
If they start talking about money 10 years ago, maybe by the time they are 16 or 17 years old, they can have not necessarily all of the information they need, but a firm starting point that they're not ashamed to seek out that information. One of my favorite stories when it comes to teaching about money is by the time I got to the third graders, they were a little bit more self-starting. And so I realized that the only way I could get them to stay on the topic was by talking about Roblox. So we had to go into the Roblox economy and how they spend money on Roblox, and there are real world applications to that. Like spending money in Roblox is basically the same thing as spending money in the real world, but then you get like those tangible versus intangible goods from that. And that's exactly what their parents are doing every day. The amount of light bulbs that went off when they have like Roblox jobs apparently. Like you
Hmm.
can work a job in Roblox. I'm like, your parents are doing the exact same thing. They're trading their time and resources for money that they can bring home, and they can like buy toys for you, or they can buy experiences for you. And the idea that you can buy experiences was like brand new to some of them. It was so fun to be able to talk about that and expand their vocabulary, and also expand the critical thinking side of thinking about money, why we go to work, why we need to go to work, and all about the economy in general. It was so fun.
Yeah, no, and my kids they're 10 and 11, and we've talked about money always, and there was always a conversation about money when I was growing up, but it was always because it was stress. My parents were constantly talking about money, how the business was going, what's happening, we don't have enough for this, and it was always kind of centered around scarcity. And so I wanted the conversation with my kids to be different. I wanted them not to just be like more, not aware of money, but I didn't want it to be I wanted it to be a neutral topic. I really wanted to talk about it in a way where even when they were very, very little, even with movies on TV, they'd be like, "Oh, that's rent or buy," and then they'd be like, "Let's look at what we have for free ones first," because they knew that if we rented or bought something, that would mean money was going here, where versus going other directions, which could be things that are more important. They have debit cards, and they have their money's on there, and so it's amazing how much they'll think about spending their own money on things like arcades, things like that, versus mine or my husband's, because they think about it different. And the LOL toys and the little toys and stuff quickly became a waste of money. She didn't enjoy them or play with them very long, so she stopped buying them or stopped asking for them and started being more interested in like puzzles or games or things that like felt more entertaining for longer because it's just decision making. It's just, not spending, it's not better than someone else's or what people like or what they're into, but it's just it's interesting to see them think that way. So I'm hoping by the time they get to big, important financial decisions like college, we can say with a better conversation, like, this is how much this costs. This is, the opportunity cost and kind of what's worth it and what's not, because they do get it. They
Yeah.
absolutely can grasp these things. It's just a little bit, it's just a different scale. And
Yeah.
like the Roblox economy, there's bucks for that. There's all these things. They know when they have more money, they can do more things. They might have to work harder or something to earn it, but they're getting it. And so I think
Yeah.
it's a really cool way to tie that in. Because there's some kids that really just will I've talked to them where they get a rude awakening when they don't get a six-figure job out of college and they've got a lot of debt and they feel like they were tricked into a life that wasn't exactly what they thought was going to happen. And so I think that it's so important for people to understand.
You bring up a really good point with those perceptions, right? Because if we're only forming our perceptions based off of what we see on TV, which I am guilty of this, I watched a lot of Disney Channel when I was a kid.
Mhm,
And so before I started learning about personal finance, I assumed that if I went to college, I would get a six-figure job right out. I
mhm,
assumed that I could buy a house when I was like
mhm.
18 years old. Because even if Disney doesn't directly, and I honestly don't know if I can say the word Disney without a
All right.
copyright. I'm
Television. Yes, go on.
okay, television, yeah.
Yeah.
Watching these kid shows
Yeah.
on TV, going into the young adult sitcoms that they made, especially for my generation, those early 2000 shows, even if they don't directly communicate this fact of, tying things into the Protestant work ethic, American dream, all of these cultural things floating around that you're not aware about, you still form your thought process based off of these incomplete thoughts. And so whenever I was doing my own research when I was 16 or 17, I learned that thought that I had maybe was realistic back in 1992, maybe, but it may not be realistic going into 2016 or 2017. That allowed me to contextualize some of the thoughts that I was having because I formed most of my opinions about what my job would be like from TV. I never had the conversation sitting at the dinner table. My mom is a nurse, and the only thing she knew about was nursing. She started her career path when she was 15 years old, and she's been a nurse. Well, she started off as an LPN. She
Mhm,
started off in that field from the time that she was 15 years old, and she had like laser focus. I have a deathly fear of blood. I will pass out if I see it. So I realized that probably was not going to be my career path. And I was on my own when it came to career planning. So getting the ability to have these conversations, I think, is a way that we can start to conceptualize these perceptions, and then as these students get older, question those perceptions, because there's nothing wrong with watching TV and watching people have perfect lives, right? But
right.
it's whenever we use that false attribution
Mhm,
to apply it to our own lives, and then students don't have sometimes another frame of reference if they're not talking about this at home or at school. So those conversations are really important because yeah, it's a reality check. And a lot of older generations like to shame young people for their thoughts,
mhm,
but they didn't come from nowhere, right? This is what, as a society, we are prepped to talk about. This is what we talk about. We're not talking about the deeper things. And if you're a child or a young adult, you don't have any other experience. Of course, you're going to think this way. I
right.
think that it's really important to think critically about why so many young people are having unrealistic expectations. And then as the adults, it's scary that I'm now on this side of the conversation, but as adults, we have to figure out how can we prevent this from happening and how can we not shame students or young adults who have fallen into this false sense of security or this false sense of it's not even really entitlement. It's just how they thought things would go. Because most of the people that I talk to who think that they'd have a six-figure job, it's not that they think I deserve this because I'm better than everyone else. They just never questioned.
That's
I
what
never thought about it any other way. So I think that falling into this trap of thinking that young people are entitled is not taking responsibility for, as a society, not properly educating them.
Yeah, no, I have to agree. And I feel like what we see, like I even I saw something online and it made me laugh because it was showing like the house from this show Married with Children, which was on in I think probably the 80s or 90s. And so they were saying like this guy was supposed to be like like a broke loser. He had a job at a like a shoe store. He had a 3-bedroom house. He had a family, like all these things that people
Yeah,
were like, that doesn't seem so bad anymore. Like, look at this property. And so it's funny because it's just changed so much with like what we see, what we hear. And I feel like it is something that I feel like every older generation, it looks like throughout time, if you look, there's like newspaper articles about the next generation's lazy, doesn't want to work, lazy, doesn't want to work. Like it's just maybe like a thing that happens where you
yeah,
just assume that. But I don't. I do feel like there is this kind of, my education was like, I think when I graduated, I think it went up 125% in like the next 5, 7 years. It was so much for the same political science degree, nothing different. So it's just, it is harder. It is getting to be very difficult. And I think a lot of first time home buyers are seeing that right now, where they're like, I wish I bought 10 years ago, but I was 16. Like I legally couldn't. And so it is something that I feel like people need to be better prepared for. And I think that there is I think it is part of all of our responsibility to encourage that and to work on that and not just be like, oh, of course you think you're going to make all this money. When I started, I made 40,000. A lot of people are still starting at 40,000, and that was years ago. And
yeah.
things were a lot less expensive. So it's just something that I find to be really a gap in education. But so you're also looking to you're a candidate for your CFP, correct?
Yes.
So, what is your favorite area of financial planning that you think you're going to want to talk to more people about or kind of focus on as you build your career? Because I love all of them, but I'm curious which one of yours is your favorite.
Behavioral economics,
Okay.
actually. Yeah. So I am a huge fan of talking about that decision making that we talked about before. And I really see myself in the future, obviously helping people with the nitty gritty, going into the softwares
Mhm.
and creating financial plans. But I think that what I'm most passionate about is looking at consumers from an economic perspective and getting their perceptions about what's going on and how they're making decisions. Decision making is what I'm extremely passionate about, and it would be my greatest honor to help people make more decisions in line with their financial futures and goals. That's something that I'm very passionate about. I think that guiding the decision making to the goals is kind of what I was put on this earth to do, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
No, and I agree. I feel like there's a lot of technology and tools that we can use to kind of support that. And I feel like that the part of this job that is so important is that human element where we can actually talk to people. Because I think that you can have a printout of like, this is the budget you should stick to. This is the training program you should do. Like we can all get that information, but it's a matter of like, but why don't we do it? And
Yeah.
why are we afraid to do it? And kind of looking at that behavioral end of it and the people, the connection piece of it is, I think, the most important part of being a CFP at this point. And it's the part that I feel like can't really be automated. Maybe once AI is smart enough to like interpret feelings and make decisions, but I really feel like that's a part that is so important for people because a lot of us know what we should be doing. We know, but then we might have some triggers or some behaviors or some things that come up which cause us to do certain things like overspend or underspend if we're afraid, like there's so many things going on. So it's such an interesting field. And I love that it's something that you've decided to focus on. But can we talk quickly about the thrifting business though? What do you
Yeah.
think is happening with that economy? Because I think that is such an interesting, I personally do like going to thrift stores. I do feel like there's kind of too much. And I was guilty of it too. I feel like when you were going, I was in college around 2000, around when you were born, and like you would get a going out top and you would buy a new shirt for pretty much every occasion. I think a few people listening might understand what I mean when I say that. So like it was like a lot of like cheap one-time use clothes. And I think that's still happening now. It's just something that I don't want to participate in anymore. So I love the idea of thrifting and turning things back into money that I no longer use. I'm a huge fan of that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that economy and how business is going there.
Yeah, the secondhand economy is growing year over year. I'm very passionate about it. And I do think that a big part of it is the function of sustainability, but also just the circular economy in general, right? I mean, going back to your example of going out tops, Gen Z has their own version of going out tops, and I love that so much. I'm living for it. I remember when I was like 6 years old, I would watch like all of this pop culture and I would think to myself, I want to be that when I grow up. And I'm so happy that things are coming back around to the point where, yeah, we have going out tops again. We have, rather than, wearing like business casual
Yeah.
to the clubs,
We basically, yeah,
we
we would go to the clubs in like pretty much, yeah, like slacks and a
like
t-shirt,
the vest says tops. Okay,
like a
but we
vest,
have like
yeah.
mom jeans and the going out tops,
Yes.
and like the scarf tops from the 1970s are back with the mom jeans. It's just such a fun time. We
Yes.
have the same thing, but we also recognize that you can wear a top one time, but someone else can wear the top one time too, right? It's not
Yes.
that you throw it out as soon as you're done with it, because
Mhm.
if you wear a top one time, someone else can wear the top one time, and
Yes.
it becomes this essential like trading economy. It's super
Mhm.
fun. And with my boutique, it was super fun to be able to facilitate those trades and have a gathering point, right? So I actually think that whenever I had a brick and mortar store, I'm currently online as I
Mhm.
continue to pursue my education. I'm a master's student as well. But when I had a brick and mortar store, I had it for, I think, 4 years. What I saw my value with was not necessarily just the clothing. It was about being a gathering space.
Mhm.
There's a lot of research going out there about third spaces and a lot of discourse on the internet about the concept of not having a third space anymore. You don't see people gathering on the streets, like in cars, just hanging out like you used to. I
Mhm.
don't know why. I am not a social scientist. So I don't have that specialty, but I did notice that. And then in my small town, I created a little space that we could just be. We could hang out and we could talk about clothes, and we had a bunch of really cozy chairs, and I opened a second location, and the couch was like always the center part of what I did. So I think providing value, yes, the circular economy was important, but overall I thought that creating a gathering space where we could talk about thrifting and we could talk about having fun, and the walls were pink, we could just be
Mhm.
girlies, we could be girlies, and it was so much fun to me. Now that I'm online, I don't have as much of that connection, and I miss
Mhm.
that so much. But I do think that leaning in and focusing on the fact that some people do discard things, and being able to bring those items back into that circular economy is really important to me. And that's the big reason why I do what I do.
Yeah, no, I think it's fantastic. I love that even having the experience, having a brick and mortar store and creating spaces, I do feel like a lot of times we are missing that. And yes, we all have screens and we pay. I mean, I don't know if that's what's caused us to lose those spaces where we had to get together and talk, but I do think that it's very it's it's fun to bring people together to talk about something that isn't just work or it isn't just, it doesn't have to be it can be just for fun or just because you have common interests and goals. I love that. And it's great
Yeah.
that there's online spaces for that too, for everybody to kind of find that, their people wherever they need to find them. But it's fun to think about all of the, the different things that you have going on. I think it's really exciting. I think financial planning will touch everything. I think even as you continue to develop your businesses, there's going to be people you come in contact with. All of this is going to you know, it kind of just kind of permeates through all of the conversations
Yeah.
that I have. I feel like I meet people and there's a way to connect and talk about money, and people will feel comfortable talking with you because they know this is something that you're comfortable with. So I think it's great to kind of provide that information without any shame or judgment and just be able to help people kind of wherever they're at have a better,
Yeah.
a better future. So um and I will say that I had my first experience with stocks in sixth grade. I was in a contest where we had to pick a stock, and I was like blown away by the thought that you could take your money and invest it in a company that already exists and make money from it. And I picked Coca-Cola because I thought Fruitopia was going to be a huge success back in like 1992 or whatever. I didn't win the contest, but sometimes it's all it takes is exposure or a
Yeah.
conversation or something. And literally, like, I can remember that and like even going through education, but like my parents didn't own stocks. They were part of like that 57% of the economy that has no retirement savings, we were part of it. There was no money saved. And so I learned about that from like something that most of the kids might have forgotten about, but it's really interesting how that kind of exposure can kind of change the trajectory for somebody's life. So I
Yeah.
think it's really, really cool to kind of get in there, have those conversations, even if you relate it to video games or whatever they're doing right now. I think it's special. It's really, really important.
So much fun. And then I just want to touch on one more thing, because I think that you mentioned something for some of that made me think of it. But I was a foster child, and that is something that really permeates everything that I talk about whenever it comes down to talking about financial literacy and financial wellness, because I, from my own experience, was adopted, right? So I didn't experience a lot of the things that other foster children necessarily are subjected to. But I know that if I didn't have like a stable home, like if I were going from home to home, it'd be really hard for me to go from being in this home to suddenly being 18 and having to be on my own devices. So I think that providing financial literacy is great because all students need to hear about it. But then there are those people, like I said, like those foster children who have no idea, and that guilt and shame about not knowing where to start and creating online content of this person who's like approachable. Like, I am an aunt, and I think that I try to bring weird aunt energy to everything that I do. And as some of the people who are in high school get younger and younger, I'm hoping I can be that weird aunt for people who
I
just
love,
don't know what's, yeah, yeah, just like that crazy energy where it's like, let's talk about money.
yeah. No,
Make
I
it
love it.
fun.
I feel like somebody has to be the one that's not afraid to talk about it, that can bring it up, because you know what? People are going to find, they'll find you and they'll be like, I have questions. I feel completely, and I hear all the time people are like, you might think I'm crazy. And I'm like, try me. Heard it all. I love it. Like, give me, like, if you say I have a weird question about money, like I am all in. So it's
I love
fun.
that so much.
There's some of us that are out there trying to figure out how we can help more people, because all of us have questions, all of us feel insecure, all of us have had been confused, been nervous about money, felt that fear, but it's really about teaching people how to take the next best step. It's not going to be overnight. It might take time. It might not be fun, but I think having those small wins, feeling like you could track things, feeling like you understand it or that you're in control of it, can really cause people to actually like shift their lives and like generational wealth in their families, which is huge, but it's got to start somewhere. And it might start with, just getting curious, Googling things like you did. And I think it's so special that you're out there doing this. So if people are listening and they want to follow you, find your boutique, or learn a little bit more about your mission, how can they find you?
Yeah, so I have social media. I'm not super active on social media right now because I'm like kind of on this like social media cleanse where I'm trying to focus on my new marriage and on grad school. But I am on social media. I am very responsive to messages if people are asking questions and everything like that. It's just if you see that it's been 57 weeks since I posted something, that's why. I have a website for like personal brand, the boutique, and I am in the process of building out the financial literacy diaries. And the podcast will be launching very soon, which I'm excited about. I'd love to see some people hop on there and hear some zany stories with me.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Aaliyah, so much for coming, for sharing your story. I love what you're doing. I'm a huge fan. And also, if you're listening and you are ready to dive into the world of financial literacy and planning, please head over to mistylynch.com. You could catch up on the podcast, you could order the book, or you can contact me directly if you have questions. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk again next week. Don't forget to share with friends and family, and together, let's demystify the world of money. Knowledge is the key to financial empowerment.